For those of you who don't know me, my name is Yvonne Ajay. I'm the director of our talent and outreach programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome Randy Street and his colleague Jordan Burton. Where's Jordan? As part of the Authors at Google program. Randy is here to talk about his new book, Who, so I want to hold this up, in which he and his business partner, Geoff Smart, discuss their method for discovering, hiring, and retaining employees, which is also known as the A method. Their method was refined through the largest research study of its kind, including 1,300 hours of interviews with more than 300 billionaires and CEOs, CFOs, VPs, and VPs of HR. Randy is the president of GH Smart Executive Learning, the business unit that helps managers learn key skills to achieve career and financial success through research, publications, workshops, and associated products. Prior to joining GH Smart, Randy worked at EasyGov, interesting company names, government software company where he served as the EVP of sales and marketing and the EVP of corporate development and strategy. Before that, he was a strategy consultant with Bain & Company, and where he led projects and advised senior executives of Fortune 500 companies. He has a BS in mechanical engineering from Rice University and an MBA from Harvard Business School, so two schools we know very well. I actually got a copy of this book several months ago and read it on a flight, and it was so compelling I actually read it all the way through and took notes as I was reading it. One of the things that really struck me about this book was how well it fit in with how we approach hiring here at Google, the importance of hiring top talent, finding the right people for the job. And it also had some components in there that I thought we could learn around interviewing in a more structured way, sourcing candidates. They talk a lot about sourcing candidates through referrals, which is something we do and want to do more of. And then also around interviewing and what they call the scorecard. So it's my pleasure to welcome Randy. He's going to speak for about 40 minutes and then allow some time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So, like a lot of you, I've been just captivated. Can you lower the volume just a hair? There we go. I've been captivated by the news and everything that's going on in the news. I've been watching the political debates and watching and reading all the commentary, and I knew I'd probably taken it too far when my 5-year-old daughter came up to me and said, "Daddy, are you going to vote for one of those two guys or George Washington?" I was like, oh! So 5-year-olds really are smarter than adults, it seems. Well, the news cycle, of course, shifted, and it's impossible not to have watched what's happened in the last month with the economic cycle just crashing with the credit crisis. I don't know if any of you guys saw Alan Greenspan's comments before Congress last week, but he said, "We are facing a once-in-a-lifetime credit tsunami." Credit tsunami. We've got this wave of delevering happening in our economy from the last 20 years of leveraging up of our businesses. And my firm, GH Smart, has had a front row seat to what's happened as we've watched clients going through this crisis. And it's quite painful for some. For those with a lot of debt on their balance sheets, who maybe have taken a little too much liberty in their growth, they're struggling, and they're really truly hunkering down. You read it in the media right now, it's happening. People are hunkering down across the world. Companies that are doing well, interestingly enough, are actually starting to really take a harder look at their businesses as well and are becoming more prudent about how they grow. So it's not that they're not doing great, it's just that they're getting much more thoughtful about their businesses. Well, you guys at Google have gone through unprecedented growth. I was talking with Yvonne, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're the fastest growing company ever, in terms of employees at least, for sure. 5 years ago, you had roughly 1,000 employees. Today, you have 20,000 employees. That's over a 5-year period of time. And the strains that puts on an organization are massive, massive. Well, you may feel like, we're Google, we can weather the storm, but the reality is your customers are going to feel the pain of the economy, and so it will filter down. You will feel the effects of what's happening in the economy. So if there was ever a time to get more serious and more thoughtful about the people that you bring into the organization and how you develop those people and how you retain the right ones, this is it. There's probably been no time in our lifetimes more important than this in terms of thinking about people. We're going to spend today focusing on the hiring piece of that. That's what the book Who focuses on, because frankly, if you get the hiring wrong, the rest of it doesn't matter so much. It's very hard to develop people who are just miscast in their role. And retention, well, you're going to end up retaining exactly the wrong people versus having the right people in your organization. So get the hiring right, and the rest of this starts to fall into place. Have you guys heard of Jim Collins' book, Good to Great? Most of you probably have heard of it, I'm guessing. It's a huge bestseller. It's been out for 5-6 years. 2001, I think, is when it came out, so 7 years, I guess. And in that book, he popularizes the notion that the most important decisions we make in business are not what decisions, but who decisions. A what decision is something tactical. What am I going to do to solve this business problem? What business should I even be in the first place? Who decisions have to do with who you put in charge of solving those what problems. You guys remember that, you may have seen the I Love Lucy episode, where Lucy says, you know what, I'm going to get into the workforce. And she and Ethel are working on the candy factory line. Does anyone remember this? It's a famous classic TV scene where they're in this candy factory and the conveyor belt is rolling. And Lucy says to Ethel, well, this isn't so bad. This isn't so hard. They take the little candies off the conveyor belt and stick them in the wrapper and put it back on the belt, and on it goes. Well, the supervisor comes in and says, oh, how's it going? It looks like you're doing great. And Lucy says, yeah, not so bad, not so bad. And the supervisor yells, speed it up! Now the line really starts to roll, and the candies are coming off, and Lucy's frantically trying to get the candies off at the belt fast enough and wrap them. She starts shoving them down her shirt. She's putting them in her hat. She's shoving them into her mouth, desperately trying to keep up with the conveyor belt. Well, you could say that the supervisor had a what problem? You know, what is the right speed of our conveyor belt? How should we configure the conveyor in the line? Or you could say the supervisor had a who problem. The supervisor had a Lucy problem. She had the wrong person in the role. Who you hire can make all the difference in your business. You guys have heard the expression, you are what you eat? Well, in business, you are who you hire. Nate Thompson is the CEO of a firm in Colorado that he founded many years ago. It's called Spectralogic. And we met Nate at a conference, as a meeting similar to this, actually. And we said, hey, Nate, you know, he's very frantic. You know, he seemed to be distracted throughout most of the workshop. Nate, what's going on? We asked, and he said, business is a strain. It's a strain. Why is it a strain, Nate? He said, I have been through five vice presidents of sales in the past 3 years. I have not been able to build an executive team to drive my business. It's driving me crazy. Part of the reason I'm in Colorado is because I love to ski. And yet, whenever I go to the slopes, the closest I get to the actual snow is looking at my family go ski while I'm back in the room, on my BlackBerry, on my email, on the phone, dealing with the problems that the people I mishired created for me. That's a who problem. And it didn't just cost Nate professionally, in the sense of hiring and firing all these VPs of sales and such. It cost him personally as well. It cost him in terms of it cost him the stresses and strains of having the wrong person, and he couldn't even go out and go skiing. So I want to do a quick experiment. For those of you with laptops, you're going to need to set it aside for just a second. If you have ever hired anybody, stand up. Good chunk of the room. Okay, excellent. For those of you who are, stay standing for just a second. Okay, now, for those of you standing and for those of you sitting, just watch what happens here. For those of you who have hired, if you have ever made a hiring mistake, any kind of hiring mistake, and it could be a colossal hiring mistake where you knew within weeks that it was a mistake, Or it could have been a little more subtle, something where the person didn't quite get the job done that you wanted them to get done. They didn't quite complete that program on time. They didn't quite deliver the sales. If you've ever made any kind of hiring decision that you would consider a mistake, sit down. Anybody left standing? I saw a few hesitating, thinking, do I sit down or am I the only guy who didn't make a hiring mistake? Well, what did you guys notice out of that? Everybody makes hiring mistakes. Exactly. You are not alone. You are not alone. In fact, Peter Drucker, the management guru, estimated that the average hiring manager, the typical hiring manager, makes a hiring mistake 50% of the time. Let's see, I think we've got, there's Nate Thompson. 50% of all hiring decisions are mistakes. 1 out of every 2 people that we hire are mistakes. They're the wrong person for the role. Now, here's what's really scary about this. The average cost of that hiring mistake is 15 times the person's base salary. Now, where does that number come from? The hard costs associated with that are the fact that you've hired the person and you're paying the person. So there's actual payment going out the door, you've got the overhead associated, you had to hire them, so there's the cost of recruitment, and if they are a mistake that you ultimately move on, there's the termination and severance and all of that. And that comes out to be somewhere around 1.5, maybe 2 times a person's base salary. But then you add in the soft costs of the work that they didn't get done, the mistakes that they made, the headaches that they created, the opportunities that they didn't capture. And it can be anywhere from 5 times their salary all the way up to hundreds of times their salary. I had a client, the reason they became a client was because the CEO, this was an asset management business, 2 years ago put a person in place in charge of real estate. And this gentleman made some big bets, broke some of the policies, and made an $80 million financial mistake. That's a huge mistake to have the wrong person in a role like that. And as you look at your organization and where you sit, you can do your own math to figure out what the actual cost is for you, but you'll find that it's very high. It's probably higher than you expect it to actually be. Why does this happen? We use what we call voodoo hiring methods that just don't work. And you may see some of this in your own hiring practices. One of them we like to call the art critic. The art critic is where you meet someone, you meet with them for a few minutes, and because you're a professional and you know what you're looking for, you make a snap judgment. The reality is it's really hard to see people for who they are. It's not like looking at a piece of art and knowing whether you're looking at a Van Gogh or a replica. It's hard to see people for who they are. Another one, and this is very common, we call this the sponge. So you admit that you're not sure. So you have everybody interview the person. You have 8 people interview the person, and they do these round robin, but you forget to coordinate. So everybody asks the same questions, or they ask uncoordinated questions. We saw an example of this where a client, I was just observing their interview process. This gentleman came in, and at the bottom of his resume, under interests, he had listed skydiving. All 6 people opened the interview with, "Wow, I see that you like skydiving," and wasted enormous amounts of time focused on skydiving. It was interesting. I learned a lot about skydiving, but it didn't have much to do with the job. And at the end, when they got together to decide, do we hire this person or advance this person, everyone was sort of looking at their hands. We asked, well, what do we know about this person? Everyone's kind of looking at their hands. And finally, one guy looks up and he goes, "Well, we know that he'll take risk." Wow, okay, so we know he's a skydiver and he'll take risk, but that doesn't really tell us, is this person well suited for the job or not? And there's a whole litany of other reasons why we make hiring mistakes, and they are outlined in the book I see some of you guys holding on to. So what's the solution to this? How do you go about hiring the A player with a 90% success rate rather than a 50% success rate? And this is what we call the A method for hiring. It has 4 parts: scorecard, source, select, and sell. These 4 pieces add up to a process that enables you to get really, really good and disciplined about how you hire people. Now, you guys already have a rigorous hiring process. So as we go through these today, be listening for things where you can improve what you're already doing. Let's begin with the scorecard. The scorecard is the document that describes what A performance is all about. It's like the blueprint that describes success. So right now you might have an image in your mind of, oh, it's like a job description. And the answer is, yeah, but not really. This is a document that defines the specific outcomes you want to see somebody achieve to be successful in their role. Now, before I get into the details of how you build a scorecard, I want to share with you an insight that we came up with that blew us away. We did not expect this, but in the research that we did, and Yvonne described a little bit about that research, in anticipation of this book, we found that conventional wisdom about hiring is actually wrong when it comes to hiring generalists, the all-around athlete who can do a little bit of everything. Now let me pause here and say you guys have a definition for generalist here that differs a little bit from my definition for generalist. So if you hire what you would call a generalist at Google, who's somebody who's a crack engineer who could be put on different projects, I would actually call that person a specialist still. They are a crack engineer. It's not like you're going to try to make that person go do your accounting or put them in the sales group. But a lot of companies, particularly entrepreneurs, and it's a habit that doesn't get broken as companies scale and expand, try to hire the so-called generalist, somebody who can do a little bit of everything. Here's an example just to give this a little more color. Nick Shabraya is the CEO of General Dynamics. And he told us a story of how he had this division in General Dynamics that was really suffering. It had a huge backlog. They're trying to manufacture airplanes, they couldn't get them out fast enough. So Nick did what every great CEO does. He went out and found the most talented person he could find, the person who could solve this problem and put this business unit right back on track. Well, the guy he hired was an A player at business development. His center of gravity was business development. That's what he loved. That's what he was passionate about. That's what he was all about. Now, he sold himself as the generalist who could solve the big problem. But what do you think happened to Nick's unit where operationally he had a massive backlog when he put a leader in charge who was all about business development in his heart? Any guesses? More backlog! Yeah, the backlog mushroomed, and now Nick Shabraya, CEO of General Dynamics, is spending all of his time dealing with this issue that his talented A-player person was not addressing. So an A-player, by the way, is not somebody who's just generally good. It's a specialist who's great at the things you need them to do. The person Nick hired was an extraordinarily talented person. He was just the wrong person for the role. In fact, Nick went on to say, I think a lot about success is having the right person in the right job at the right time with the right skills for the business problem that exists. After making a few mistakes, what I have worked hardest at is defining the problem at hand. This is what the scorecard is all about. It's defining the problem at hand. And rather than going out and hiring a generalist and hoping for the best, it enables you to focus your energy on hiring the specialist who can attack this problem that you have that you need attacked. How do you do it? There are three pieces to the scorecard. I'm going to walk through mission, outcomes, and competencies. And if you'll just draw your attention to the mission first. The mission is a short statement, few sentences, maybe a short paragraph, that describes the essence of the role. And this is something that's pretty familiar to you. If you look at the mission on the board, you'll see it looks a lot like an executive summary that you might see at the top of a job description. And that's basically what it is. But here's why it's important. If I said, hey, let's go hire an account manager, what that means to me and what it means to you and that person sitting next to you and everyone around the room, it's probably going to be different. Right? Some account managers are salespeople. Go get me new business. Some account managers are farmers. Hey, take care of my existing accounts. Some account managers have nothing to do with sales. It's more of a customer service rep. An account manager is not an account manager is not an account manager. You want to define the kind of account manager that you're looking for. I had a client literally in a session like this. I said, hey, who's hiring? I'd love to get a real life example on the board. And some fellow raised his hand and said, hey, I'm hiring a strategic planner. I said, great, tell us what you're looking for. He said, well, you know, we're a bank. We've got offices all around the world. I need somebody who can get out there and understand what everybody's doing, understand their budgets, and roll all of that up to the central organization so we have some insight into what's going on around the field. And this guy's boss was in the room, and he kind of perks up. And he's like, wait a minute, time out. That's not what I approved. We need a visionary leader. We need someone who can go understand what the competition's doing, understand what the customers need, and take that out to the branches and to the banks around the world. I don't need a tactician to roll up data. I need someone who can add value to the field. And these guys got into this huge debate, and finally the guy making the hire said, wow, I guess I should maybe put on hold my hiring process. And his boss was like, yeah, I think maybe you should. The mission helps you get clear about who it is you're trying to hire and why. Now, once you've done that, you define outcomes. I've listed 2 on the board, but you usually will have somewhere between 3 and 8 on any given job. What is an outcome? An outcome is the specific result that you want to see somebody accomplish to be deemed successful. Now, let me contrast now a job description and an outcome on a scorecard. A job description says a series of activities. Duties and responsibilities include selling, calling on customers, negotiating contracts, dealing with issues as they arise. Other duties may apply, right? It's a list of stuff. And it's pretty general, too, by the way. If you look at you know, what you're hiring, you take any role that you're hiring for and compare that to your competitor's equal role, they probably look the same. Maybe because you copied the same monster board, you know, thing off the web, right? It's the same junk. It doesn't mean anything. Here's what an outcome says. An outcome is a result-driven accomplishment that you expect to see. So, for example, grow revenue from $200 million to $400 million over the next 5 years, achieving 15% annual growth. What do you notice about that statement? Shout it out. It's quantifiable, measurable. Specific? Yeah. There's a deadline. Yeah, in fact, those are the 3 I love. Specific, measurable, time-bound. Have you guys heard of a SMART goal? S-M-A-R-T? Right. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to the job, and time-bound. It's a great way to think about outcomes as well. The litmus test is, if I were to sit down with my employee that I hired at the end of the year and ask the question, did they achieve this or not, could I answer with a yes or no, or would there be some debate? Because what happens in performance reviews is you take the job description, the person's like, what are you talking about? I called on customers, I sold, I dealt with issues as they came up, and you're over here as the manager going, but the customers aren't happy, the dollars aren't there, you didn't get it done. You didn't get it done. Well, it's the it that needs to be on the scorecard. Does that make sense? So define outcomes that are observable or measurable and time-bound, and make them as specific as possible. Here's another one. I love this one just because I'm in the people business. Build a team composed of 90% or more A players within the next 3 years. This basically says, get your team right. How do you do that? You figure it out. But guess what? It probably has something to do with hiring and developing and retaining and all the normal things. But rather than describing all of that, hire a team, retain a team, develop your team, you say, no, what I want is the result. I want an A team. That's what the outcome is all about. Finally, competencies. Competencies have to do with the behaviors and skills you expect to see. And you can drive yourself crazy trying to figure out what are all the right competencies for the role. And the research actually shows that competency modeling is not predictive of job success. So for all the energy we as a nation and as a world of managers put into competency models, they don't tend to actually work. So what we suggest you do instead is focus on the Google culture. What are the elements of the Google culture that matter? And make sure the people you hire are a cultural fit. So this list of competencies has to do more with cultural dynamics. Over a third of all job failures have nothing to do with the person's skill. It's a cultural mismatch. You're a fast-moving culture, they're slow-moving. You're informal, they're formal, right? It's those kinds of things where there's just friction that causes people to fall out. 36% of job failures are due to cultural mismatch. So focus your competencies there. And if there are specific things for a job, you have a salesperson who has to be great at negotiation, yeah, put negotiation on the list because that is a pretty finite thing. But when you get into things like, oh, I want someone who's persistent and somebody who's got good communication skills, you're in the land of fluff, guys, and it doesn't actually drive any real predictability with success. That's the scorecard. If you get the scorecard right, you have built yourself a blueprint. You've built yourself a target. You know what you're looking for when you go out to find people. So that brings us to the second prong, source. How do you find people? And this plays a bit of a supporting role to the whole process. You guys actually are world-class at this. So your talent outreach programs are among the best in the world. I can tell you I've seen a lot of really not so good ones. You guys are phenomenal at this. You do great things with your college ambassador program and giving people pizza during exam time and the blogs and everything you do is actually awesome. Your problem is not a problem of finding people. You're Google. People want to work for Google. Your problem is you've got this huge funnel of people who kind of want to come work here. So how do you narrow the funnel and get the right people? Focus on the right people in the process. Well, it turns out the number one way for finding the right people, the targeted people, is through referrals. And I think you guys already have some referral programs in place, so I won't belabor this point. The question is, are you optimizing it? And so I'll share just a few thoughts to get you thinking, I guess. But 77% of successful business executives cite referrals as the single best way to find the right talent for your organization. And the best example of this is a guy we met named Pat Ryan. 30, 40 years ago, Pat Ryan started an insurance company. It was Pat and two insurance sales guys. And they didn't have a budget. they didn't have recruiters helping them out. So they came up with a question. And here's the question. Everywhere they went, everyone they talked to, they asked this question. Who are the most talented people you know that I might want to hire? So when they would go on sales calls, they would finish up the call and say, hey, thank you for your time. Hey, by the way, who are the most talented people you know who I might want to hire? Other insurance sales reps who've come through your door that you really like. And then they'd go call those guys. When they would hire somebody, they'd, hey, welcome to the company. Who are the most talented people you know that we might want to hire? They even took this socially. You're out socially. Hey, what do you do? You've all heard that question, right? What do you do? Yeah, okay, yeah, so I'm starting an insurance company, blah, blah, blah. Who are the most talented people you know that I might want to hire? They asked everybody this question, and over the years built what is now Aon Insurance Company, which is it used to be about a month ago, a $12 or $13 billion company in Chicago. In the old Standard Oil building, it says Aon Insurance on the side. The market has taken a hit to them as with everybody, but they're huge, they're huge. And to this day, Pat Ryan still mandates that his team ask this question. They tend to use referrals for most of the people that they bring into the organization. So as you think about your referral programs, think about how are we tapping our employee network? How are we capturing this data? Do we have applications that enable us to manage this? How do we give incentive and reward to people who are bringing us the people that we actually want to hire? Around the world, too, not just locally. So do continue with all the programs that you're doing. Just know that as you're thinking about how do we narrow the funnel, referrals tend to be the single best way to get there. All right. And Pat, by the way, said, and this was interesting, he said, I'm not smarter than everybody else. I just spent more time hiring people. I'm constantly building my network. And this was during a Crain's Chicago interview where he was talking about and answering the question, hey, Pat, to what do you attribute your success? You've built this $13 billion company. This was his answer. Didn't have anything to do with strategy or execution or some, luck. It was the people that made all the difference for Pat. This brings us to the third prong on the A method, select. Now, select, when we do full workshops, this is where we spend a lot of time because this is where you're gathering the data to make sure you've got the right people in your organization. There are 4 interviews: the screening interview, top grading interview, focused interview, and reference interview. I'm not going to go through all 4 of those today, given our time together. I'm going to focus on one, which is the top grading interview. Have you guys heard of this by any chance? Has anybody heard of top grading? 1 nod, maybe 2? Okay, good. Would you like to explain it? No, just kidding. Just kidding. The top grading interview, let me black this out for 2 seconds. It's a chronological, structured walkthrough of a person's career. The goal of it is to gather data. Just like if you're doing due diligence, if you're buying a new laptop, for example, you don't just go buy a new laptop willy-nilly or a new cell phone. You gather the data. You try to get a sense for what each piece of equipment will do for you and not do for you. Well, the same is true with the top grading interview. How do you gather the data, real data, to make an informed choice? The top grading interview allows you to do it. It's chronological, it's structured. Now, by chronological, I mean you start at a person's first job, the beginning of their career, and you literally walk your way through their career, and you let them tell you their career story. Versus, think of a normal interview, you're popping all, well, give me an example of when, and they're pulling stuff from all over their career. In this interview, you're walking through their career. By structured, I mean you use the same 5 questions every time. This is the beauty of it. It's so simple that you can remember these 5 questions because you're asking the same ones over and over and over. What are those 5 questions? I'll run through them and then I'll back up and explain them. So what were you hired to do? What accomplishments are you most proud of? What were some low points during that job? Who are the people you worked with? And then down here, number 5, why did you leave? Now, just to explain the rest of the slide, you may begin the interview by talking a little bit about their educational background, and you'll probably end the interview talking a little bit about their goals and motivations and where they're headed. So you kind of put the caps on the ends of this thing. But the bulk of the interview is walking through their jobs, asking these 5 questions. Now, here's what's actually going on. Question number 1, what were you hired to do? What you're really saying is, what was your scorecard? What was the mission of your role? What were the outcomes for which you were being held accountable? What competencies mattered? But you can't ask that because they won't know what you're talking about. So you ask, hey, so what were you hired to do? And you may need to embellish. What did your boss consider successful? You know, what was the essence of your role? Use the language of the scorecard to try to get a sense for what was success in this job. Now ask, hey, so great. What accomplishments are you most proud of? Now, ideally, it has something to do with what they just told you. I love it when you hear, hey, so what were you hired to do? Well, yeah, so I was hired to actually turn around this function in the organization. So the whole IT department was a disaster. They brought me in to turn it around. Then you go, okay, great. What accomplishments are you most proud of? Made a lot of friends in that role. Yeah, I had a good time. And you're sitting there thinking, oh, what about turning around the IT department? How did that go? And sometimes people just forget to connect the dots there. So ideally, they're going to answer, yeah, I turned it around. I turned it around. And then you get into detail. How'd you do it? What did that look like? How long did it take? Really flesh out what happened there. Get 2 or 3 examples, too. Don't just get one accomplishment. Now, third question is going to get a little bit trickier. So now you're asking, what were the low points in the job? Sounds like you were very successful. What didn't go so well for you? Now, some people will hem and haw, and they'll say, oh, it was a great, good years, nothing went bad, it was good times. Keep asking, right? When they give you this, just keep pushing, and ask it in different ways. Oh, okay, so good years, that just sounds like they were good years. Well, you know, what did you not like to do in the job? What was your least favorite part of the job? What was your worst day? What was your biggest disappointment? Just keep coming at it with different versions of the same question to understand the lows along the way. So you'll get a few examples there. Now you turn your attention to this 4th question, which I love. So you ask first about bosses. So hey, we're going to talk a little bit about the people. Let's talk about bosses first. And there's a method here that we call TORC, and you can see it on the screen. T-O-R-C, threat of reference check. And here's how it works. You first ask, hey, great, so in that job, what was your boss's name and how do you spell that? And if you haven't taken a note the whole time, pull out your pen. Okay, John Smith, great. Now that's S-M-I-T-H, right? And what's happening here is you're sending a little signal. I'm calling John, right? So I want to make sure I get the name right. Okay, great. So that's it. You worked for John Smith. Wonderful. What was it like working with John? And you're going to hear one of 2 things. You're going to hear things like, oh, I love John, great guy. He really helped me develop and grow. And you're going to hear other people say, John was an idiot. And by the way, you know, if I ever have to work for anyone like John again, I will shoot myself. And that's sort of a little flag in your mind because you're sitting there thinking, all right, does this person realize that I may be their future boss? and they're bad-mouthing their past bosses. If one boss, by the way, as you're going through the career history, if one boss is not good, not a big deal. If John's an idiot, Sue's a moron, Jane was the complete wasteoid who shouldn't have been in that job, you've got a problem on your hands if you hire this person, right? You don't want to hire that person. They don't get along well with their bosses. Ideally, you don't hear that very often. The next one then is after they've explained what it's like working with John, you say, great. When I speak with John, what will he say your strengths were and areas for development? Now, most people will give you very pointed answers. Oh, he'll say, I'm persistent, I had great negotiation skills, I really closed that business, boom, boom, boom. Like really specific stuff that matches what you just heard in the earlier part of the story. It's a beautiful thing when you hear this. But sometimes, every now and then, you're going to get somebody say, I don't know what John would say. We had a real-life story. This is a guy who literally is like, I have no idea what John would say. And we said, well, in your performance review, what did he say were your big areas for development? And he said, I don't know. We never had performance reviews. And we said, okay, well, so just when he was walking around, water cooler talk, what kind of feedback did he offer? And he said, I don't know. John never came out of his office. So now we have to get creative. So we're like, all right. So when John was in his office with the door closed, talking to other people about you, what do you think he might have been saying? And this guy goes, he kind of sits back in his chair and he says, that's a really good question. You know what? My buddies and I got so sick of John never coming out of his office that we snuck in one night and we planted a bug. And we're like, wow. Now, your reaction as an interviewer is like, you did what? Right? But you've got to control that, right? So you just smile. Oh, so what did he say? Right? You just sort of roll with it. In the back of your mind, you're thinking, this guy's crazy. Now, that doesn't happen very often. Every now and then, though. Then ask about their teams if they're a manager. How many people did you inherit? How strong was the team? How many would you say were A's, B's, and C's is the vernacular we use? And then what changes did you make along the way? And what was the team like when you left? It just gives you a feel for how they manage that team. And by the way, you can use torque here. A little more theoretical, but you could say, hey, if I could sit down with your team, what would they say about you as a manager? What do they like about working with you? What do they not like about working with you? And you get some nice insight into their managerial style. Now, this last question, why did you leave that job? Jack Welch calls probably the most important question, the one question that he would ask if he could only ask one question in his book, Winning. You're going to hear interesting insights into the transition, why they moved from job A to job B. And you're looking for pull. I got pulled. Former boss called me out of the blue, or a colleague of mine recruited me, or recruiters were all over me. That's good. The guys who say, yeah, there was a riff. And you say, a riff, a reduction in force. And you ask, well, how many people were riffed that day? And they're like, yeah, 2. Yeah. Okay, bad, right? Pushed out of the organization with a riff. Now, what you also want to watch out for are the theoretical answers like, I had a philosophical difference with my boss. This is a true story, probably my favorite crazy story out of GH Smart. We asked a guy who was a head of sales who was applying for a higher position, why did you leave that role? And he said, I had strategic differences with my boss. And of course, now we're thinking, all right, we can't picture this. You can't picture strategic differences. So let's play with this a little bit. Great. What were the strategic differences about? And he said, well, I guess it came down to this board meeting. We're in the meeting. Board's kind of giving my CEO a hard time because our sales numbers were down. Oh, well, how much were your sales numbers down? He said, we were probably 25% off goal. He's the VP of sales, by the way, right? VP of sales, 25% off a goal. So the board's giving the CEO a hard time. It's kind of a rough time. And finally, the CEO looks up at the board and says, yeah, you're right. If we can't get our sales numbers up, we're going to have to get a new VP of sales. And as interviewers, we're like, oh, wow, he said that. You're in the room. Yeah, I'm sitting right there next to the CEO. It was unbelievable. He just insulted me like that. Oh, what did you do? And he says, well, I just kind of pulled myself up. And I said, you know what your problem is? Or excuse me, your mother had a whole lot of foresight when she named you. We're like, wow, what was his name? His name was Richard, but he didn't go by Richard. Think Richard Nixon. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, this guy just insulted his boss. Well, what happened? He says, Yeah, you know, the board was laughing. Richard didn't like that. We all file out of the room. I'm like, oh, so what happens now? He's like, oh, yeah. So Richard pulls me aside and he says, you know, I didn't appreciate that back there. Pack your stuff. You know, your numbers are down. You've just insulted me. You're out of here. And we're like, well, what did you do? And now we have him, right? We got him at this point. He's like, well, I hit him. I hit him. Now we're really shocked. Well, how'd you hit him? It was like to the face, you know, a little knee action. Like, how'd you do this? He's like, oh, yeah, I just smacked him across the face. He was down. He got really ticked off. He called security. That's when I was terminated with cause. Yeah, security escorted me out of the building. I lost my $3 million option package. My wife and I like to call this my $3 million slap. Strategic differences with my boss. I struck my boss, lost my job, terminated with cause, lost my options package. Now here's what's wild. When you do a top grading interview, because you're just walking through a person's career chronologically, they feel like they're just kind of in a conversation. They lose sight of the fact that they're in an interview. And 1 out of 20 people is going to tell you something that's absolutely crazy. And your job as an interviewer is to just smile and absorb and keep pushing to understand what's behind the story. All right, so the top grading interview allows you to gather huge amounts of data. You do this once and you'll be blown away at the level and depth of insight you have into a person. When you're done with that, you pull out that scorecard, remember the scorecard that we looked at? And you rate the person. All right, great. How likely do I think it is that this person can achieve outcome number 1? Put a rating against it. We like to define A as 90% or better chance. 90% or better chance that they can do that. And why? Based on the data that you heard throughout the interview. And on down the scorecard you go, and at the end, you're never going to see a straight A student. It doesn't happen. But you're looking for someone who, by and large, can achieve what's on your scorecard. Particularly the most important things on your scorecard. It's also a handy way, by the way, to compare candidates. If you have a role where you have 2 or 3 candidates, you can compare how you rate them across these different criteria. Okay, the final piece is sell. We've built our scorecard, we've sourced great people, we've selected using the top grading interview. How do you sell those people on joining you? I'm going to focus on the 5 F's of selling: fit, family, freedom, fortune, and fun. These are the 5 things that come up over and over and over as important drivers of why somebody falls out. The first one is fit. Help them see that they're a great fit with Google, with your organization, with your team. This is where you pull out the scorecard and you show it to them and let them see how they can actually do the job that you want them to do. Family. If you're moving people, or if they perceive it as risk, family is going to get involved, right? You think you're done. You've checked the box. All right, I've got my offer out. I can get back to my real job. Well, meanwhile, their family is whispering in the ear, do you really want to take this job? Do we really want to move? Right? So make sure you understand if there are family dynamics and do something about it. Freedom. We live in a world, and you guys probably do this better than most, but a world where people like to have the freedom and autonomy to do their job. If you have micromanagers, you know, train them to not be. Stop. People don't like working under micromanagers. Fortune, help them see how they're going to achieve financial goals and what the upside is associated with the job. Money's always going to come up. And fun, show them how they're going to have fun in the role. These 5 things are the drivers. And it's easy to mess this up. George Buckley, who was recruited by a board of directors to become the CEO of 3M, described how he went through a 9-month recruitment where they called him, took him to dinner. I mean, it was wooing, lots of wooing. And when they made the offer, he described the next step as such. Nothing. Silence. He said it was like they were buying a refrigerator and they were just waiting for it to be delivered. Not realizing that I had other opportunities, my family wasn't sure, so on and so forth. So find out what the drivers are and do something about it. The 5 F's of selling. So this is it. This is the essence of the A method in a quick nutshell. Hiring is a huge problem, a highly costly problem that you can address with these 4 pieces: scorecard, source, select, and sell. And I'm going to close with a quick story that I love. A gentleman named Bill Koch was asked to take charge of America's Cup in 1992. America's Cup was failing, they were struggling, and they asked Bill Koch, who was an oil magnate, to come take this on. And there was a little bit of a controversy about this because Bill was a recreational sailor, but he wasn't a professional sailor. So why would they bring this guy in to take over? Well, it turns out Bill had learned a lot about leadership in his career, and he applied some of these exact same principles to America's Cup. Very first thing he did is he built a scorecard. And on it, he put talent, teamwork, and attitude, and then the specific things for the different roles that you had on a boat. And then he measured everybody on the team against those things and realized he had two people that were just not a good fit for what he was trying to accomplish. They were thought to be the best sailors in the industry. He fired two of the best sailors in the industry, at least according to conventional wisdom. Well, that caused a mutiny. Another guy comes and he tried to go to the board and say, you've got to get rid of this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. He fired that guy on attitude. And then he rebuilt the team by selecting people rigorously that fit the specific scorecards that he had built for the boat. Vegas gave them 100-to-1 odds against. 23 out of 24 newspapers said, they'll be watching the wakes of the Italian boat, which was much favored at the time. So imagine how Coke and team felt when they found themselves in the deciding race edging out the Italian team. Imagine how they felt when everybody hunkered down to do exactly what their scorecards had them doing, the different roles on the boat. And imagine how they felt when they crossed the finish line in first place, 44 seconds above the Italian team, or in front of the Italian team. Imagine how that must have felt. And imagine how it would feel for you and for your managers that you might support if they have that kind of a winning team all pulling together to drive Google forward. It's spectacular what happens when you get the right people in the right roles. And we do a huge service to the people that we hire when we help get them in roles where they can do the things that they do best, where they can shine, where they can be the A player. The A method will help you get there, and I hope that some of the tools that we talked about today will be useful to you as you think about your efforts. So we've got a few minutes. I'd love to open up to questions. We've got about 10 minutes. What's on your mind? From either things I said or things maybe that you're doing that you just want to test. Yes?
How would you apply it to college students?
Great question. Great question, particularly because when you think about the chronological structured walkthrough, there's not much history there to go after. What I love to suggest is if you're hiring anybody, try to find 5 chapters of their career. So, and I'll come to the college student momentarily. If you're hiring somebody who's got 20 years, 30 years experience, you may need to take some of their early jobs and kind of squish them together so that you end up with 5 chapters, 5 times where you walk through these 5 questions. For college students, you kind of have to unpack it the other way. So you may say, all right, chapter 1, let's talk about when you were on that intramural lacrosse team and you were captain of that team. So you ask the 5 questions around what they're proud of, what didn't go well with respect to that. Chapter 2, great, you were in a leadership position for your sorority. Boom, chapter 2. Chapter 3 might be summer job. All right, you're waiting tables at Applebee's. Wonderful. Let's talk about that as chapter 3, and you go through it that way. So you have, and it's a much quicker interview, by the way, because there's just much less to talk about. Does that help? A little bit. Where did I miss?
What about technical, like trying to get technical skills out?
Yeah, so technical skills, you probably do you guys do some kind of a technical interview or technical test? You do that. 90%. That's 90%, yeah. So what I would do is I would still do that. I would just supplement it with the top rating just to get a feel for their style, how they attack problems, and that sort of thing. It'll be a quick interview. You knock that out in an hour or less, just because there's that much less to talk about. We have a client that does this interview with truck drivers for garbage trucks, and it's a 45-minute, 30-minute interview where they're testing for safety and other things like that. And it's pretty tight, but they get a sense for the guy's attitude by how they talk about the things that they've done. Question here, and then I'll come back there in a sec. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of related to my question. You had suggested about, I think, 20 to 30 minutes for each job, and with the 5 questions. And most of our interviews are 30 to 45 minutes. So I was wondering what you thought, if they did have a lot of experience, like what would be the minimum amount of time needed to really go into those 5 questions?
It's minimum is probably 15 minutes a chapter if you really want to get rigorous. If you want to fly through it, you can probably do 10 minutes a chapter. So if you do 5 times that, you're still looking at an interview longer than what you're currently doing. So then you have to ask yourself, do I try to just do this in the 30 or 45 minutes that I have, or do I create a new interview around this? We have clients do it different ways. The ideal is you have an interview that really walks through. You have at least one person. It doesn't have to be everybody in the process. One person go through the career history. If you just don't, if your process won't allow for that, you can cut a few corners. I'm not advising this as best practice, but you can say, you know what, forget 5 chapters, we're doing 3. We're going to take their last 3 chapters and skip all the rest. Or we'll take chapter 1, the first job they had, skip everything in the middle, and then take the last 2 jobs they had. Because first jobs, you kind of hear a little bit about their raw skills and how they attack things when they're untrained. And then the last 2 jobs are most relevant to the current day. So you could do that in an hour or less with relative ease. It's not as great, but it still gives you more data about how they think and how they behave when you go back to that scorecard. It's a great question. There was one back here. Yes, sir?
You had talked about how referrals are the primary driver in terms of getting those A people.
Yeah.
In your research or in your experience for the companies that get the who question right,
Yeah.
do you have any data on what percentage of those people are through referrals rather than other sources?
That's a great question. I don't have scientific sort of tested data, but I can tell you it's a high percent. It's probably 40 to 50% or higher. The challenge, and this is the risk of referrals, is you've got to push yourself not just to get a bunch of people who look like us in the organization, all the same age, all the same demographic. So you've got the downside of referral is it enables you to fall in that trap if you don't cast a wide enough net. So you don't. I think Pat Ryan is at an extreme. Most of his organization is referral based, but I'd say most who use it effectively, 40, 50%, and that's just a little bit of that from what I've seen. What else is on your minds? Anything else? Okay. Oh, yeah, one more. Yeah.
So if you're doing the 5 chapters and you have the same 5 questions for each one, is it sort of like very structured? Like, are you just for each one, are you just going down the list and asking?
So the question is, if you've got these 5 questions that you ask across the 5 chapters, is it very structured and is it the same list? And the answer is yeah, it actually is. And that's part of the beauty of it. Here's what's interesting. The very first chapter, you'll ask these 5 questions. And in fact, when I do an interview, I'll tell people, I'm going to ask you these 5 questions. I actually tell them the questions ahead of time. Then we get into the first job, and I ask those 5 questions. And you follow up. When you say, hey, what are you most proud of accomplishing? And they say, I was able to get some programs out much faster than my colleagues. Follow up. How'd you do it? What did you do? Like, really put meat on that bone before moving on. But you ask the 5 questions. By the time you keep doing the same 5, when you get to the last job, they start anticipating and they tell you what you know you want to hear to the point where you're not even asking the questions. You've kind of trained them. So as an interviewer, the job is easy because you only have 5 questions to ask. Your job becomes much more about digging into whatever they reply with, dig in with what did you do, how did you do it? Those are my 2 favorite follow-ons. What'd you do? How'd you do it? What'd you do? How'd you do it? What'd you do? How'd you do it? Just to get a little more meat on that bone. But it's very structured. What you're going to find is people going through it say, wow, that was actually very conversational and fun. People enjoy it. Why do they enjoy it? Because they're talking about their favorite topic for the entire time, all right? They're telling their story. Their story. Somebody actually cares enough to listen to their story. It's a beautiful thing. And as a manager, as managers and recruiters, we owe it to the people that we hire to match the person with the role. We do a terrible disservice when we don't match people to roles. I saw a statistic, I don't know if this is true, 80% of people don't like their job. That's a crime, if that's true. I don't know if it's true or, that's a crime. As managers and recruiters, we owe it to the people we hire to match the person's passions and skills, what they're great at and what they're not great at, with the job that you have for them to solve. And when you do that, you unlock amazing amounts of potential. Everybody's an A player at something. Our job is to find that something and match it to what we need them to do. I appreciate your time today. I'll stick around if you have any questions. I encourage you to check out our book. It's a pretty easy read, wouldn't you say, Yvonne? We had great joy in writing it and hope that it'll be helpful to you and everybody you know. It's currently on the New York Times bestseller list, which we're very proud of. So please check it out. Maybe it'll give you some more insight into some of the things that we talked about. If you ever have any questions, drop me an email. I'm very accessible. My colleague Jordan is as well. We'd be happy to help you think them through. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.